Hello everyone, welcome to the Mysterious Stories channel, where you'll discover the most mysterious, scary, and fascinating stories. Make sure to turn up the volume and get ready for a spine-chilling experience you won't forget. During that time, I have to say that when talking about the war, I will not refer to anything inappropriate. Back then, it can be said that Kanpui was also regretful because after participating in the war for a while, it was rumored that Thai soldiers were very skilled and highly respected. They were so respected that they were nicknamed High Soldiers, meaning they were extremely skilled. This was understood by foreign soldiers as well. Similarly, on the enemy's side, there was a unit referred to as beasts, almost like demons, because they were equally skilled. Let's say if we respected Thai soldiers, we wondered why they were so esteemed. There was an incident in a town called Sukhothai where Thai soldiers of the Cobra unit fought against the enemy at a ratio of about 6-1 or 5-1. Despite these odds, the Thai side lost only one soldier, while the enemy lost around 400 to 500. In battles, the soldiers had to distinguish between different units and countries to avoid friendly fire. On the enemy's side, they had a rule that if they heard shooting and then it stopped, they knew it was American soldiers. If the shooting was followed by crawling, it was South Vietnamese soldiers. If there was shooting and then complete silence, it was Laotian soldiers. But if there was shooting and continuous advance despite heavy casualties, that was Thai soldiers. In one mission, the task was to patrol, and this marked the beginning of the story. They moved in a formation called V, with the left and right wings elevated. The lead soldier was instructed to stop at a tree, but suddenly there was an explosion from the left side, and the entire wing was hit by explosions. The narrator was fortunate to be behind a large tree, which protected him from the blast. The narrator, shocked and disoriented, saw his close friend and fellow soldier already down from the explosion. He managed to run and take cover, but he was left stunned and unable to react for a while. In the chaos, he couldn't move and was overwhelmed by the situation. Side by side, using the phrase "guts spilled out," the letters wouldn't survive, but they would still talk as if in their last breath. At the moment of the incident, it was tragic, and they couldn't go anywhere. Their legs were injured. Meanwhile, the air was quite cold and getting darker. No need to mention lights. There were none. Only flashes came when someone fired a shot or launched a rocket over the hill. He was sitting, leaning against a tree, exhausted and not knowing what to do. While consciousness faded in and out, he hoped that when the light flashed, he might see someone standing or sitting nearby. He was happy to have company, but when the light flashed, he saw someone sitting up, which made him hopeful. However, as the light dimmed, they vanished. The soldiers heard the sound of approaching steps and hoped it was their comrades, but deep down, they knew it was the enemy. The enemy soldiers moved slowly, one by one, stabbing downwards as if checking for survivors. They came closer and closer. He thought to himself that anyone who sat up was doomed. When a beam of light hit someone sitting, he saw the enemy stab, and the person would disappear, seemingly dissolving. He believed he was witnessing the souls of his comrades leaving their bodies. He couldn't do anything in the darkness but chant prayers in both Thai and Vietnamese, despite not knowing the Vietnamese prayers well. Growing up in Thailand, he recited Thai prayers. He imagined that if these were Thai soldiers, they would have amulets for protection. But being here, he had to accept his fate. The cold air made it hard to breathe. He felt the presence of someone approaching from behind, thinking they would slit his throat. He heard the footsteps coming closer, and as they reached the tree, he stopped breathing. The hand over his mouth, he resigned himself to his fate, expecting death, but instead of a knife, the person whispered to him in broken Vietnamese, telling him to be quiet. He was confused, thinking he was about to die, but then he was pulled up and told they would be taken away. The person who took him had a plan. They were to be taken to a pit where bodies were thrown. After an hour, they heard someone being dragged out of the pit. The enemy soldiers laughed and played with their guns, sometimes firing, sometimes just clicking the triggers. It was a deadly game of Russian roulette. One by one, they fired, and he heard the screams of those who were hit. As the soldiers came to his pit, they looked inside and spoke to each other. He couldn't understand the language, but sensed they were deciding who would be next. They pulled out a few bodies and continued their game. He was in the pit, praying and hoping he wouldn't be next. He heard footsteps again and saw a figure approach, but this time it was different. It was a man with a radio, dressed in what seemed like the enemy's uniform. He whispered to them, telling them to follow him quietly. They followed the man, who turned out to be a South Vietnamese soldier disguised in the enemy's uniform. He had a plan to lead them to safety. The group of 4 soldiers followed him through the darkness. They moved quietly, trying to avoid detection. The man with the radio, whom they started calling Lao, led them through a narrow path. Lao had been in the area long enough to know where to go. He had a radio to communicate with the planes above. Lao signaled them to stop near a tree. He climbed a tree and looked around. They waited anxiously. Then, he signaled again and they continued. They reached a riverbank, and Lao told them to wait. The rain started to pour heavily. They hid under some large leaves, trying to stay dry. Lao went to check the area. While waiting, they saw someone coming from the water. It was a woman. The American soldiers were surprised. She was beautiful, with long hair and smooth skin, even in the rain. The Thai soldier whispered to them, "Isn't she beautiful?" The American soldiers were confused. They asked Lao why he was using a woman as a guide. Lao explained she was his daughter, and she knew the area well. The American soldiers were still puzzled, but had no choice but to follow. They crossed the river and continued their journey. Lao's daughter led the way, moving gracefully even in the difficult terrain. They reached a small clearing, and Lao told them to rest. They were exhausted but relieved to have survived so far. As they rested, they heard the sound of rockets and gunfire in the distance. They knew they had to keep moving. Lao used his radio to contact the planes above, asking for a safe passage. They had to move through a heavily fortified area. Lao's daughter led them through the night. She seemed to know every step, avoiding traps and enemy patrols. Finally, they reached a safe zone where they could be picked up. The relief was overwhelming. They had made it through the night, thanks to Lao and his daughter. The American soldiers were grateful and amazed by their bravery and knowledge. As they waited for the helicopter to pick them up, they couldn't help but feel a deep respect for their guides. They had survived a night that seemed impossible, and it was all thanks to Lao and his remarkable daughter. That person said, "Do you have a radio? Let me radio for assistance." So, they asked for his name. Once he provided his name, the Thai soldier turned pale. After a while, they asked for the unit name again, and when he said it was the making unit, the Thai soldier became even more shocked and then stepped back. There was one Thai soldier wearing a necklace made of rope threaded with several human ears. The person who answered about the unit name was also the one who eventually bowed down and said, "May you rest in peace, Sergeant." After that, the group of people disappeared. Now, this part happened after everyone was confused about what had occurred. The radio connection was almost established as they were trying to reach the hill to get a signal. This was the last incident I will recount. As they tried to contact with the radio, a sudden light like a flare illuminated the dense forest. It seemed like 1,000 candles worth of light. They heard noises like people shouting and gunfire for a moment, but then it went silent. The light had cut through the dense forest in a way that normally only an armored vehicle could do. The American soldiers seemed puzzled. They asked if the Thai soldiers knew what had happened below. The Americans expressed disbelief about the situation. One soldier said, "There really is something down there," confirming the fears. They decided to wait and observe. Eventually, they found bodies that had been severely mutilated, which didn't seem to be the result of gunfire or explosions. Some of the American soldiers were holding unexploded grenades. It was as if they had been attacked by something incredibly powerful and mysterious. One of the Thai soldiers explained that they had experienced similar supernatural phenomena and had charms for protection. This incident led them to believe more in the supernatural, although they had always been skeptical before. The Thai soldiers mentioned that their training emphasized never leaving a comrade behind, and they believed this strong bond was ingrained in their spirits. This might explain why they sometimes seemed invincible. I shared this story because, recently, at the special education school I work at, the topic of monsters came up. The children asked about different monsters from around the world. When they asked about Vietnam, I didn't know what to say. After some research, I discovered that Vietnam has its own folklore and creatures. This actually happened during the war. Has anyone seen it? So I went to look up information. There are 7 market telephone numbers. It seems like it could be some kind of creature that lives in the forest. It's already there. The doctor also speculated that it could be a wild person or a big monkey. It is very big and has been seen by both Americans and villagers. I'm not sure what it's called, but people who have seen it refer to it as Batugan. If it really exists, according to the stories, then this person had the chance to see more than anyone else. When the flare lit up, only one person saw it and could describe it as a large monkey that jumped up a tree immediately. It was so big that it could climb any tree. That's why today I'm sharing this story about the war. I can tell you they weren't afraid of ghosts because all day and night. I haven't talked about this because the clip wasn't available initially. It was a sound clip with eerie sounds in the forest. Sometimes you could hear local songs, sometimes cries like people wanting to go home. There was a voice in Vietnamese echoing in the forest, saying things like, "Mom, where are you?" It sounded like crying, which scared the 3 soldiers, Tai, Lao, and me. We heard it every night, especially last night. One soldier didn't believe in it at first, but he later heard it too. I tried to find a sound clip to show how terrifying the war sounds were. You can find clips of war sounds if you search. There's something called the wandering soul that's believed to be the ghostly echoes of the dead, used by the Americans in psychological operations to scare the enemy. The Americans used these sounds to haunt the Viet Cong hiding in underground tunnels, making them anxious. This was part of the psychological warfare, playing sounds of people wanting to go home. It's terrifying. If anyone wants to know how scary it was, you can search for the war sounds. The sound clips show how it affected the soldiers. One of the Thai soldiers wore a necklace made of human ears. It was a tactic to count the enemy's dead bodies since they couldn't count them all. The story I shared today was about a former soldier who fought in the Vietnam War, a war that happened decades ago. If you've watched documentaries, you'd know it was a brutal war. The battles took place in forests with soldiers from various units, each with their own beliefs. They brought charms and rituals for protection because just weapons weren't enough for peace of mind. The storyteller, Bird, shared how the soldiers believed in supernatural protections and used them to fight the enemy. Each soldier had their own methods and charms. Bird's grandfather was at the center of this story, with other characters involved. Each person had their own protective charms, making it hard to explain. There were strange creatures in the forest, not just in Vietnam, but in other places too. It's hard to prove their existence, but they are believed to be real. The story highlights how people's beliefs and charms protected them in war. Each character in the story had their own ways of dealing with the supernatural. The storyteller believed that these experiences were deeply etched in their memories. Elders often tell the same stories repeatedly because they made a lasting impression. Do you think it's deeply imprinted in their minds? I don't know if what happened to them is 100% true, or if it's just stories passed down, but I believe that since the grandchildren say they tell the same stories repeatedly, if they keep repeating it, it must be something deeply ingrained in their minds. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales. so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.